Dogs started disappearing one by one. At first, people thought they'd just run off, but after a full year, no trace of them was ever found, until a 6-year-old boy took a man by the hand and said, "I know where they went." For over a year, the town of Elmridge had been holding its breath. It was the kind of place where people left their doors unlocked and everyone knew each other's dog by name. But something had changed. He had started quietly. A missing collar, a dog that didn't come back after a walk. At first, no one paid much attention. Dogs ran off sometimes. It happened, but then it happened again and again. 12 dogs vanished in less than 8 months. No bodies, no signs of struggle, no barking in the night. They simply disappeared. People started putting up fences, chaining their pets, installing cameras, but nothing ever showed. The cameras would glitch. The fences didn't help, and the town grew quieter, more paranoid. Kids stopped playing outside, neighbors stopped trusting each other, and every night, the silence felt heavier. Mark, a local mailman in his 40s, had been delivering letters in Elmridge for nearly 2 decades. He'd watched the town shift from cheerful to suspicious, and something about the pattern gnawed at him. Every dog that had disappeared lived near the forest, and every time he asked about the last time someone saw their dog, it was always just before sundown. He mentioned it more than once to the sheriff, who shrugged it off. Coyotes, probably, he'd say. But Mark had grown up in this area. He knew what coyotes did. He knew how dogs reacted to them. This wasn't that. And deep down, he felt it. Then one cold afternoon in November, while making his rounds, a little boy named Ethan approached him. Ethan didn't talk much. He was shy, quiet, always holding on to his worn-out blue backpack. But that day he walked right up to Mark, looked him in the eye, and said something that stopped him cold. "My dog's not gone," the boy said softly. "I saw where he went. I can show you." Mark crouched down, suddenly alert. "When did you see him?" "Last night," Ethan whispered, eyes fixed toward the trees, in the woods. He was following someone. Mark's skin prickled. He looked toward the edge of the forest, and for the first time in months, he took a step forward. Mark hadn't planned on going into the woods that day. He still had 3 streets left on his delivery route, and the November light was already beginning to fade. But there was something in the boy's voice, calm, unwavering, that didn't feel like imagination. Ethan wasn't making up a story. He had seen something. And Mark, against all logic, decided to trust him. "All right, kid," he said, adjusting his cap and slinging his satchel tighter over his shoulder. "You lead, but you stay close. Got it?" Ethan nodded once and turned without hesitation, walking toward the tree line behind his house. Mark followed. The forest behind Elmridge wasn't particularly dense, but it was vast. A mix of pine and bare oak stretched for miles, threading between farms and empty logging roads. People hunted in there sometimes, but no one really explored it, not since the disappearances began. The trail they took wasn't marked. It wasn't even a real trail, just a faint impression of footsteps through flattened grass and leaves. Ethan walked in silence, his small boots crunching softly. Mark noticed the boy's body language. No fear, no excitement, just focus, like he knew exactly where he was going. After about 10 minutes, the trees thickened and the air turned colder. Mark felt that stillness, the kind that made you want to whisper without knowing why. Ethan finally stopped beside a narrow creek and pointed. "That's where I saw him," he said. "My dog, Jasper. He was standing right over there, but he wasn't alone." Mark squinted through the trees. "What do you mean, not alone?" "There was a man," Ethan said quietly, "but I couldn't see his face. He didn't look like he saw me. He just walked deeper into the woods, and Jasper followed him." Mark felt the hair rise on his arms. He stepped across the creek, the cold water seeping into his shoes, and looked around. No footprints, no fur, but something wasn't right. The silence here wasn't natural. It was too complete. No birdsong, no wind, just stillness. "Ethan, how long ago was this?" "Last night, before bed. I snuck out when I heard barking." "I only watched for a minute." Mark nodded slowly. He pulled out his phone to mark the coordinates but there was no signal, not even one bar. That was unusual. He'd never had trouble getting a signal this close to town. "All right, kid, let's get you home. But tomorrow, I'm coming back. Alone." Ethan didn't argue. As they walked back, Mark kept looking over his shoulder. Nothing moved, nothing followed. But something lingered. Not fear, not yet. Just something. That night, Mark couldn't sleep. He laid in bed replaying the boy's voice. His eyes, the exact way he said he was following someone. He had no proof, no footage, no tracks, but he knew what he'd felt. The stillness, the emptiness, the lack of sound, and the way the forest seemed to pull in around him like it was holding its breath. The next morning, Mark packed a backpack with a flashlight, a thermal blanket, a spare phone battery, and an old compass he hadn't used in years. He told no one where he was going. He just scribbled a note and left it on the kitchen table, back by sunset, checking the woods. M. By early afternoon, he was back at the creek. He spent hours combing the area. He marked tree trunks with chalk. He documented his steps, but he didn't find a single trace of dogs. No hair, no bones, no collars, just more silence. But at 3:47 p.m., he noticed something strange. A thin wire, half buried beneath the leaves. He knelt to examine it, metallic, coated in green plastic. At first, he thought it was just an old hunting snare. But when he followed it 10 meters uphill, he saw something else. A motion-activated trail camera, still blinking, still active. He leaned in, inspecting the casing. It wasn't standard wildlife equipment. It was military grade, unmarked. Mark suddenly felt watched. Mark froze, staring into the blinking red light of the camera lens. A shiver crawled slowly down his spine. The town of Elmridge wasn't a place where people used surveillance equipment like this, especially not hidden military-grade gear tucked deep into the woods. Someone had gone to great lengths to hide something or protect something. Careful not to disturb the camera's angle, Mark slowly backed away. Questions swirled in his head. Who had placed this camera here and why? Were the missing dogs connected to this? And what about Ethan's mysterious figure, the man the child claimed was leading the dogs away? He scanned the surroundings, suddenly aware that he might not be alone. His breath came short and fast, fogging in the crisp November air. The forest, previously calm and quiet, now felt oppressively silent. Every rustle of leaves sounded louder, every snap of a branch echoed ominously. He instinctively checked his phone again, still no signal. As Mark moved carefully through the brush, he began noticing subtle signs that someone had traveled this route frequently. Small branches were snapped at uniform heights. Moss was disturbed along logs, and there were faint depressions in the earth. Someone's repeated footsteps had carved a quiet path deeper into the woods. He followed cautiously, driven by a mix of curiosity and growing unease. After a short distance, the path opened into a small clearing surrounded by thick brush. At the center stood a modest wooden cabin, weathered and gray, with boarded-up windows and a rusted tin roof. Mark stopped, his heart pounding fiercely in his chest. He'd lived here his whole life, but he'd never seen or even heard of a cabin this deep in the forest. Approaching slowly, Mark noticed there were no vehicles, no signs of life outside, but the structure wasn't abandoned. Footprints, fresh enough to be recent, led directly to the cabin's heavy wooden door. On closer inspection, Mark noticed something else. Small scratch marks along the bottom of the doorframe, dozens of them, as if animals had clawed at the door, desperate to get inside or get out. He hesitated. Every instinct screamed at him to leave, to get help. But what if this was where the dogs had been taken? Could they still be inside, trapped, waiting for someone to rescue them? He reached out and gently tried the door handle, locked, solidly. He stepped back, breathing deeply, trying to think. He couldn't just break in. He had no idea who or what was inside. He circled the cabin, looking for another way in or a window to peer through. Behind it, he discovered a small trapdoor partially hidden by overgrown bushes and leaves. Kneeling, he brushed away the debris and slowly lifted the rusty handle. The trapdoor opened to reveal a dark staircase leading down beneath the cabin. The musty smell of damp earth and something metallic rose to greet him. Mark hesitated at the top of the stairs, gripping the flashlight tightly in his hand. Adrenaline surged through his veins, heart hammering in his ears. He aimed the beam down, revealing concrete walls and steps, descending steeply into darkness. He could see faint traces of paw prints dried into the muddy steps, leading downward. They were definitely dogs, paw prints, dozens of them, big and small. Just then, a distant noise startled him, a muted, metallic clang, followed by what sounded like faint scratching from somewhere deep below. He stiffened, eyes wide. His pulse raced faster, blood roaring in his ears. His rational side screamed at him to turn back and call the authorities, but something stronger, deeper, urged him forward. Slowly, quietly, Mark descended the stairs, every step amplifying his fear. The scratching sound grew louder, clearer, as if something or someone was desperately trying to escape. He reached the bottom of the staircase and turned the corner, his flashlight illuminating a long, narrow corridor. Heavy metal doors lined the hall, each secured by thick bolts and locks. Then, from behind one of the doors, he heard it, a soft whimper, unmistakably canine, followed by more scratching. He hurried toward the sound, adrenaline overcoming fear, and tried the lock. Sealed shut. Mark put his ear against the cold metal door, hearing more clearly now. Dogs, whimpering, scratching at the metal from within. His mind raced. Who had done this? Why had they taken so many animals? Before he could decide his next move, a sharp noise rang out from upstairs. Footsteps, heavy and deliberate, entering the cabin above him. He froze, pulse quickening again. Whoever had done this was back. And now, Mark was trapped underground with no way out, nowhere to hide, and the dogs, frantic cries echoing around him. Mark's pulse thundered in his ears as he stood frozen in the narrow, dimly lit corridor beneath the cabin. The footsteps above moved steadily, rhythmically. Whoever it was knew exactly where they were going. He had seconds, maybe less, before being discovered. He scanned his surroundings in desperation. No alcoves, nowhere to hide, just metal doors and unforgiving concrete walls. He switched off the flashlight, plunging himself into total darkness. Carefully, quietly, he moved backward, pressing his body into the shadowed recess beside one of the locked doors. His heart hammered as the footsteps descended the stairs toward him. A bright light swept into the corridor, harsh and blinding. Mark held his breath, watching a silhouette move methodically forward. It was a man, tall and broad, dressed in dark clothing, his face partially hidden beneath a hood. In his right hand, he held a large key ring, the sound of metal jangling echoing coldly against the walls. Mark felt trapped, his body rigid, muscles aching from tension. The hooded figure stopped at the door closest to Mark's hiding spot, unlocking it slowly. The hinges groaned. Mark glimpsed what lay beyond the doorway, a small cell, dimly illuminated by a single bulb. Inside, huddled in the corner, was a frail-looking Labrador, trembling and wide-eyed. The man entered, grabbed the dog firmly by the collar, and dragged it out roughly into the corridor. The dog whimpered, tail tucked tightly between its legs. Mark could barely hold back his rage, forced to witness the cruelty unfolding before him, but he couldn't intervene, not yet. He watched helplessly as the figure hauled the frightened animal toward the stairs. Mark waited until he heard footsteps reach the upper level again before exhaling deeply, his breath shaking with fear and anger. He knew he had to do something, anything, to rescue these animals, but he also knew he couldn't do it alone. He moved quickly down the corridor, trying each door again. All locked. At the end of the hallway was a small, dimly lit office. Inside, he saw a desk cluttered with papers, keys hanging on hooks, and a bulletin board covered with photographs and notes. The walls were lined with surveillance monitors, each displaying grainy footage from around the property. Mark scanned the screens. One of them showed the woods outside, another the staircase. Whoever ran this place was monitoring everything meticulously. He quickly rifled through the papers, his hands trembling. There were lists, names, dates, and details of the missing dogs. He recognized many of the names: Jasper, Daisy, Charlie, and dozens more. Beside each name was a date, a breed, and a chilling notation: test completed, or in process. His stomach churned. He grabbed the papers, folded them hastily, and stuffed them into his pocket. He knew these were crucial evidence, proof he needed to bring to the authorities. As he turned to leave, something caught his attention on one monitor. Outside, a familiar figure was visible in grainy black and white, wandering near the tree line. It was Ethan, the boy who had first led Mark into the forest. Mark's breath caught. Ethan was alone, approaching the cabin. Mark's heart slammed violently against his ribs. The boy had followed him back here. He was in danger. Instantly, Mark rushed back toward the staircase. His fear was now eclipsed by urgency. Reaching the bottom of the steps, he paused, listening. Silence. Carefully, he ascended the stairs, pushing open the trapdoor cautiously. The cabin seemed empty. He moved swiftly toward the front door and stepped outside into the twilight. "Ethan," he whispered sharply, spotting the boy just a few meters away, frozen in his tracks. Ethan's eyes widened, recognizing Mark immediately. "I saw you go in," Ethan whispered nervously, stepping closer. "Did you find Jasper?" Mark took Ethan by the shoulders, gently but firmly. "Listen carefully, we have to go, right now. It's dangerous here." But as he turned toward the woods, headlights suddenly flooded the clearing. A black SUV emerged from behind the trees, stopping directly between them and the path back home. Mark shielded his eyes from the harsh lights as a figure stepped out, silhouetted by the beams. The hooded man from earlier was back, his posture rigid, and now accompanied by another person who stood silently by the vehicle. Mark's body tightened, adrenaline surging fiercely. They were caught, nowhere left to run. "You shouldn't have come here," the hooded man's voice rang out coldly. Mark recognized that voice instantly, disbelief gripping him like ice. It was Sheriff Thompson, the very man who had dismissed his concerns about the disappearances from the start. The realization hit Mark like a physical blow, his mind racing. He'd been right all along. The dog's disappearances weren't random accidents. They were planned, systematic. And now he knew why no investigation had ever uncovered anything. The sheriff had made sure of it. Mark stood frozen in the harsh glare of headlights, his mind spinning, heart pounding violently. Sheriff Thompson took another slow step forward, his presence suddenly imposing in the twilight. The familiar, reassuring face that had once patrolled Elmridge now seemed cold and dangerous. "Mark," the sheriff said evenly, his voice calm but edged with threat, "you've gotten yourself into something that doesn't concern you. I should have listened when I said it was just coyotes." Mark glanced instinctively toward Ethan, gently nudging the boy behind him, shielding him from view. "Why, Sheriff?" he asked, his voice hoarse with disbelief. "Why the dogs? Why do all of this?" Thompson sighed, shaking his head slowly. "Some questions are better left unanswered." Mark's eyes flicked toward the silent figure standing by the SUV, recognizing Deputy Mills, another officer he'd known for years. Mills avoided his gaze, his posture rigid. He seemed uncomfortable, as if torn between loyalty and regret. "You've been experimenting on these dogs," Mark continued, his voice shaking but defiant. "What kind of sick tests could justify any of this?" "Tests?" Sheriff Thompson laughed bitterly. "No, Mark, research. Important work. The kind that can save lives someday. Those dogs, they're heroes. They're helping us prepare." Mark shook his head, incredulous. "Prepare for what? You took these animals from their homes. You destroyed our community's trust, Sheriff." Thompson's expression hardened, voice lowering dangerously. "Sometimes sacrifices have to be made, small-town pets against a much greater good. It's a price I'm willing to pay, and it's done. Now we have a problem, you know too much." Thompson nodded slightly to Deputy Mills. "Bring them inside." Mills hesitated but stepped forward, holding his hand out cautiously. "Come on, Mark, don't make this harder." "No," Mark said firmly, holding Ethan tighter behind him. "We're not going anywhere with you." "You don't understand," Thompson growled, stepping closer. "If you leave here, everything we've built is compromised. I can't allow that." Ethan tugged anxiously on Mark's sleeve, voice trembling. "What about Jasper? Can we still save him?" Mark's throat tightened painfully. "We're going to try," he whispered, even as his pulse raced with dread. Thompson's patience vanished. "Enough!" he barked. "Mills, take them in, now!" Deputy Mills moved reluctantly forward, placing a firm grip on Mark's shoulder. But suddenly, Mark twisted free, shoving Mills aside and grabbing Ethan's hand. "Run!" he shouted, pulling Ethan into the cover of trees as fast as they could move. Behind them, Thompson yelled sharply, "Stop them! Don't let them get away!" Branches whipped their faces as Mark and Ethan fled deeper into the forest. Ethan stumbled, nearly falling, but Mark kept him upright, adrenaline pushing them both forward. Mark could hear Thompson and Mills crashing through the underbrush behind them, closing fast. He knew the terrain, but darkness was descending rapidly, obscuring familiar paths. "Ethan," Mark gasped, stopping for a brief second to crouch beside the boy. "You know these woods better than me. Is there somewhere safe, somewhere we can hide?" Ethan nodded quickly, breathing heavily. "There's an old tree house by the creek, hidden behind big rocks. We play there sometimes." "Lead the way," Mark urged, desperation tightening his chest. They ran again, Ethan guiding swiftly despite the fading light. Every crack of a branch, every rustle of leaves made Mark's heart race. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Ethan pointed to a massive oak beside a small creek. Behind it, partially hidden by rocks and fallen logs, stood the remnants of an old wooden structure high in the tree. "Up there," Ethan whispered breathlessly. Mark helped Ethan climb first, gripping the ladder tightly, each rung feeling painfully slow under their weight. Once inside the small, dilapidated structure, they huddled quietly, listening intently. The forest had fallen silent again, the kind of tense quiet that suggested pursuit wasn't far behind. Mark pulled out his phone again, desperation sinking in as he saw the persistent "no signal" warning. Ethan sat trembling beside him, eyes wide with fear. "What do we do now?" Ethan whispered softly, his voice shaking. Mark put an arm around the boy's shoulders, steadying him. "And we wait here until it's safe, then get out of these woods and expose Thompson. Everyone needs to know what he's done." He glanced out through a small gap in the wooden wall, watching the moonlight slowly filter through the trees. They were trapped, hunted, and completely alone. Yet despite the odds, Mark felt a quiet resolve grow within him. Thompson's secrets couldn't remain hidden forever. But just as hope began to surface, a flashlight beam pierced through the darkness beneath them. Mark froze, holding his breath. Sheriff Thompson's voice echoed clearly, chillingly close. "You think hiding will help you, Mark? I know every corner of this forest. You're not getting out, neither of you." Mark held Ethan close, covering the boy's mouth softly to muffle any frightened sounds. Beneath them, Sheriff Thompson slowly circled the massive oak tree, flashlight beam scanning meticulously through bushes and low branches. Mark's heart slammed violently in his chest. Every passing second felt like an eternity, each breath impossibly loud. Thompson's voice broke through the tense silence, sharp and cutting. "Mark, you're putting yourself in danger. Think about the kid. Do you really want his blood on your hands?" Mark flinched at the threat, anger and fear mingling bitterly inside him. Ethan trembled under his grip, eyes wide and terrified. Mark whispered gently into his ear, "Stay quiet. He's just trying to scare us. We'll get out." The sheriff moved away slightly, continuing his search methodically through the underbrush. Mark seized the moment, cautiously releasing Ethan. He peered out through a crack in the treehouse, gauging their surroundings. The woods stretched infinitely, dark and dense. Their best hope was to wait until Thompson moved further away, then slip out unseen. Minutes dragged by painfully until finally, Thompson's flashlight beam drifted away deeper into the woods. Only when his footsteps faded completely did Mark allow himself to breathe normally again. He quietly motioned Ethan toward the ladder, whispering firmly, "Move slowly, one step at a time. Don't rush." They climbed down cautiously, every creak of the old wooden rungs feeling loud enough to draw Thompson right back to them. Reaching the forest floor, Mark grasped Ethan's hand and together they began moving swiftly and silently away from the treehouse, choosing their steps carefully to avoid snapping twigs or rustling leaves. They walked for what seemed like forever, skirting wide around the cabin, keeping away from the area Thompson and Mills had been patrolling. Eventually, Mark recognized landmarks, the creek's gentle murmur, familiar rock formations illuminated by moonlight. Relief surged faintly. Home was finally within reach, but as they neared the tree line leading back toward Elmridge, Ethan stopped suddenly, pulling Mark's sleeve with urgency. "Wait, do you hear that?" Mark listened intently. At first, silence, then faintly, unmistakably, came the mournful sound of dogs barking. It drifted weakly through the darkness, distant yet painfully clear. Ethan turned toward the sound immediately, his expression determined despite his obvious fear. "Jasper," he whispered. "That's Jasper's bark. I'm sure of it." Mark's chest tightened painfully. Escaping now meant safety, but also abandoning the dogs to their fate. Every instinct told him to run and find help, yet he knew exactly how easily Thompson could destroy evidence and move the dogs elsewhere. They had one chance. Now. He knelt beside Ethan, looking him firmly in the eyes. "Ethan, you have to listen carefully. Run back home, go straight to your parents, tell them everything. Call every neighbor you can trust and bring them back here. I'll stay. I'll try to free the dogs." Ethan hesitated, tears filling his eyes. "But what if something happens to you?" Mark forced confidence into his voice. "I'll be fine, but those dogs need our help right now. Go, hurry." Ethan hugged him tightly, then ran towards town as fast as his small legs could carry him. Mark turned, heart pounding, and moved quickly toward the barking sounds, each step deepening his fear and urgency. He reached the clearing again, the cabin looming ominously ahead. The barking was louder, panicked, and desperate now. The black SUV sat parked outside, empty. Mark approached carefully, peering through one of the windows. No movement, no lights. He crept back to the trapdoor behind the cabin, descending carefully into the familiar darkness below. The barking intensified, filling his ears painfully. Reaching the corridor of locked doors, Mark ran immediately to the office he had searched earlier, grabbing keys off the hooks, and rushed toward the metal doors. One by one, Mark opened the cells. Dogs bolted out, frightened yet eager, following him obediently toward freedom. He recognized several from town, thin and dirty, but alive. His pulse raced as hope surged. Perhaps he could get them out safely after all. But suddenly, a voice snarled from the staircase above him. "Did you really think it would be this easy?" Mark spun around, facing Sheriff Thompson once again, gun pointed directly at him. His voice was ice cold, dangerous. "You couldn't just walk away, could you? You couldn't leave well enough alone." Mark held the keys tightly, heart hammering, dogs cowering around him. "It's over, Sheriff," he said firmly. "Ethan's bringing help. Everyone will know." Thompson's mouth curled into a grim smile. "They'll know what I want them to know. Tragic accident, dangerous criminal trespassing. Your word against mine, Mark. And you won't be around to argue." The click of Thompson's gun safety echoed ominously in the confined space as Mark stood frozen, seconds away from everything collapsing around him. Mark stared down the barrel of Sheriff Thompson's gun, heart hammering furiously, his breath shallow. Around him, the freed dogs trembled anxiously, sensing imminent danger. He could feel their warmth and fear pressing against his legs. The reality of his situation sank heavily into his chest. There was no immediate escape, no clever way out. Not this time. "Move away from those dogs, Mark," Thompson ordered harshly. "You're done interfering." But before Mark could respond, Deputy Mills appeared at the staircase behind the sheriff, breathless and agitated. "Sheriff, we've got a problem. The kid made it back. He told the neighbors, people are coming, lots of them. They're headed this way." Thompson cursed sharply under his breath. For a brief moment, his attention flicked toward Mills. It was the opportunity Mark desperately needed. Without hesitation, Mark lunged forward, grabbing Thompson's wrist and pushing the gun upward just as it discharged, the sound deafening in the confined space. The bullet embedded itself harmlessly into the ceiling. The dogs erupted into panicked barking, scattering around them, frantic and confused. Mark wrestled Thompson to the ground, adrenaline fueling his strength as they grappled for control of the weapon. Mills hesitated, torn between aiding his sheriff and the sudden awareness of what they'd done. "Help me, Mills!" Thompson shouted angrily. "Grab him!" But Mills stood frozen, unable to move, eyes wide with moral conflict. Mark seized the sheriff's brief distraction, knocking the gun away. It skidded across the floor and disappeared beneath one of the cell doors. Thompson threw a punch, catching Mark across the jaw, but Mark responded fiercely, driven by sheer determination to protect himself and the dogs. "Deputy!" Thompson yelled again, desperation and anger intertwining in his voice. "Do something!" Finally, Mills stepped forward, but not toward Mark. Instead, he grabbed the sheriff from behind, pulling him away forcefully. "Enough, Sheriff," Mills shouted, his voice shaking. "It's over, it has to stop." Thompson struggled against Mills' grip, fury blazing in his eyes. "You're betraying me now, after everything." "I can't protect you anymore," Mills replied sharply, his voice rising over the chaos. "We've crossed the line. These people, these animals didn't deserve this. I never signed up for cruelty." Mark stared in shock at Mills, breathing heavily. The deputy met his gaze with a blend of regret and resolve. "Mark, get those dogs out. Hurry. People will be here soon. I'll hold him here." Nodding quickly, Mark scooped up the keys from the ground and began urging the dogs toward the staircase, his heart pounding in rhythm with their frantic paws scrambling upwards. The barking intensified as they burst out into the cool night air, scattering into the safety of the trees. Outside, distant flashlights flickered among the trees as Ethan returned, leading a group of townspeople through the woods. Voices called out anxiously, "Mark! Ethan! Where are you?" "Over here!" Mark shouted, relief surging through his entire body. The group quickly converged around him, shocked to see the frightened animals emerging from the shadows. Several residents immediately recognized their pets, crying out in joy and relief as emotional reunions unfolded rapidly in the clearing. Ethan ran straight toward Mark, breathless and smiling widely. "You did it!" the boy exclaimed, throwing his small arms around Mark's waist. "You saved Jasper. You saved all of them." Mark hugged Ethan tightly, overwhelmed by relief, but his moment of victory was cut short when several shots rang out sharply behind them. The townspeople recoiled in fear as Mark spun around, heart seizing again with dread. Sheriff Thompson emerged from the cabin, breathing heavily, gun raised once more. Deputy Mills staggered out behind him, clutching his shoulder, injured and bleeding. "Get away!" Mills shouted weakly, sinking to the ground. "He's gone mad." The townspeople froze, staring in shock as Thompson's eyes swept wildly across the gathering, filled with desperation and fury. "Stay back, all of you!" he yelled. "None of you understand, none of you!" Mark stepped forward carefully, hands raised in surrender, trying to defuse the situation. "Sheriff, it's over, please! There's no need for more violence. We can end this now." Thompson shook his head violently, despair clouding his features. "You ruined everything, Mark. You ruined years of work." Suddenly, Ethan stepped bravely forward, small but defiant, voice clear and determined. "Oh, you're the one who ruined everything. You hurt Jasper, you hurt our town." For a moment, Thompson hesitated, looking down at the child, something within him faltering. His grip on the gun slackened just slightly, enough for Mark to step closer, placing himself between Ethan and the sheriff, heart racing painfully. "Put down the gun," Mark said softly, firmly. "Please, Sheriff. Don't do something you can't undo." Sheriff Thompson's hand trembled visibly, conflict warring within him as every eye locked onto his shaking figure, the night holding its breath, waiting desperately for his next move. The silence was crushing. Sheriff Thompson stood motionless, gun shaking slightly, pointed loosely toward the ground. Mark felt his chest tighten, each heartbeat thudding painfully against his ribs. Behind him, Ethan remained bravely rooted in place, refusing to retreat even under such immense danger. The gathered townspeople formed a tense half-circle around them, eyes wide with fear and disbelief. Thompson's gaze darted anxiously from face to face, seeing not just anger, but something far more devastating: betrayal, confusion, hurt. He'd once been their protector. Now he stood as their greatest threat. Finally, the sheriff's voice cracked, strained and raw. "I have no idea what's at stake. The things I've done, everything was to protect this town." Mark kept his voice gentle yet firm, trying desperately to keep Thompson calm. "Whatever it is, Sheriff, it can't justify hurting innocent animals or innocent people. You're better than this. It's not too late to do the right thing." But Thompson shook his head sharply, anguish twisting his features. "You can't do this. You can't. You think it's that easy. That there's a way back from this. You can start right now, Mark pressed softly, inching cautiously closer. Put down the gun, Sheriff. Just put it down. Thompson's breathing grew heavier, erratic, his gaze flickering uncertainly toward Ethan. He stared at the boy, eyes glistening before returning to Mark, voice choked with regret. It wasn't supposed to end this way. You have to believe me. Just as Mark sensed Thompson's resolve wavering, the sheriff suddenly snapped alert, head swiveling toward the distant sound of sirens piercing the night air. Flashing blue and red lights flickered through the trees as more vehicles approached. The state police finally responding to the chaos. Panic surged through Thompson's eyes, desperation overtaking any remaining hesitation. No, he muttered sharply. No, this can't happen. Not now. Before Mark could react, Thompson swiftly raised his gun again, not at the crowd, but at his own temple, eyes closed tightly in despair. Mark lunged forward instinctively, crying out, "No!" But Deputy Mills, bleeding and weakened yet still conscious, moved faster, throwing himself at Thompson's arm and pushing it upward just as the gun fired again. The shot echoed harshly through the clearing, the bullet harmlessly disappearing into the night sky. Mills collapsed onto the ground again, groaning weakly. The sheriff stumbled back, eyes wide in shock and confusion. Mark didn't hesitate. He tackled Thompson forcefully, knocking him down and wresting the gun away. Around them, townspeople rushed forward, quickly securing the sheriff's wrists with rope someone had brought from their farm. Moments later, state police officers flooded into the clearing, guns drawn, assessing the chaotic scene. They took immediate custody of Thompson, gently helping Deputy Mills to safety and ensuring the townspeople were unharmed. As the officers led Thompson away in handcuffs, Mark noticed the sheriff's defeated posture, shoulders slumped, eyes hollow. Thompson paused briefly, looking back at Mark, his voice barely audible. "I'm sorry. I never meant for this to happen." Mark simply nodded slowly, too exhausted and shaken for anger or hate. "I know, Sheriff, but it did." When the officers finally departed, quiet fell once more upon the forest. Neighbors embraced each other, crying softly, comforting children and pets alike. Mark found Ethan, who stood beside Jasper, his beloved dog now safely back in his arms, the animal licking the boy's face affectionately. Ethan looked up, eyes still wet with tears but now shining with gratitude. "Thank you, Mark. Thank you for not leaving Jasper behind." Mark knelt down gently beside Ethan, smiling softly. "You saved them too, Ethan. If you hadn't shown me, if you hadn't been brave enough to come back, none of them would be free." Ethan hugged Jasper tightly, burying his face into the dog's soft fur. Nearby, other residents gently rounded up their rescued pets, murmuring soft reassurances, still processing the night's revelations. Deputy Mills, now bandaged and seated in the back of an ambulance, motioned weakly for Mark to approach. Mark stepped closer, expression guarded yet compassionate. Mills spoke quietly, regret heavy in his eyes. "I should have stopped him sooner. I was too scared, Mark. I didn't know how to say no." Mark placed a comforting hand on Mills's shoulder, shaking his head gently. "You made the right choice when it mattered most. It's not too late for you either, Deputy." Mills closed his eyes, exhaling deeply, relief mixed with remorse. "I hope you're right." Mark stood silently, absorbing everything, the fear, anger, sorrow, relief, all swirling together. But above all else, there was a powerful sense of renewal, of justice reclaimed, and of community bonds slowly beginning to heal. He turned back to see Ethan smiling gently up at him, Jasper leaning warmly against the boy's legs. For the first time in over a year, Elmridge felt like home again. But beneath the relief lay questions still unanswered, mysteries still unsolved, and Mark knew deep down the true reasons behind Thompson's actions had yet to be revealed. In the weeks following Sheriff Thompson's arrest, Elmridge slowly began to heal. The rescued dogs were returned to grateful owners, and families reunited joyfully, celebrating the return of their beloved pets. The state authorities meticulously combed through Thompson's hidden facilities, collecting evidence, documenting the extent of his disturbing activities. But despite the physical resolution, A lingering question haunted Mark's mind. Why had the sheriff done it? What could justify such cruelty? Driven by the need for answers, Mark requested permission from the state investigators to review the collected evidence. After some initial hesitation, they allowed him access, recognizing his pivotal role in uncovering Thompson's operation. He spent hours poring over files in the small conference room at the Elmridge police station, sifting through notes, photos, and lab reports. His eyes widened as he read through Thompson's meticulous journals, detailing something far beyond mere cruelty or insanity. The sheriff's project was connected to a larger organization, one focused on developing a new type of canine, one with heightened abilities and extreme obedience, intended for clandestine military operations and high-stakes law enforcement missions. Each dog from Elmridge had been carefully selected based on specific genetic markers indicating higher intelligence, agility, and responsiveness to training. But something had gone wrong. Thompson's notes grew increasingly frantic and disjointed as his experiments repeatedly failed. Instead of developing enhanced capabilities, the dogs became anxious, unpredictable, even aggressive. Thompson had tried to cover it up, disposing of any animals that showed severe side effects, but by the end he was overwhelmed, desperate to hide his failures. Mark leaned back heavily in his chair, rubbing his temples. The implications stunned him. Thompson hadn't acted alone. There were mentions of contacts, funding sources, shadowy individuals who had supplied him with the technology and resources. And at the bottom of one page, scribbled hastily, was a chilling note. Project abandoned. Dispose of evidence. Protect identities. The thought unsettled Mark deeply. The sheriff had been a pawn in something larger and more dangerous than anyone realized. How deep did this go? Who else was involved? A knock on the conference room door startled him out of his thoughts. Deputy Mills stood awkwardly in the doorway, bandages still visible beneath his uniform. "Mind if I come in?" Mark nodded slowly, gesturing toward a chair. Mills sat down, eyes weary and guilt-ridden. "You found the journals, didn't you?" Mark nodded again. "Yeah, but I don't understand. Who were these people Thompson was working with?" Mills exhaled sharply, glancing nervously toward the door. "I don't know everything, but Thompson mentioned powerful people, government contractors, military types. They promised him funding, a future beyond Elmridge, if he succeeded. But once things went wrong, they abandoned him. He was terrified of them. Mark, he thought they'd come after him." Mark stared at Mills, feeling cold dread coil in his gut. "Do you think they're still watching us?" Mills hesitated, avoiding Mark's eyes. "Maybe." Thompson was convinced of it. "He warned me before he was taken away, said we'd never truly be safe again." Mark's pulse quickened. "What do you mean?" "He said these people, whoever they are, would protect their secrets at any cost. He was terrified for his life. Even in custody, he kept begging the investigators to protect him." Mark's mind raced, questions multiplying rapidly. "Did he ever name anyone specific?" Mills shook his head slowly. "No, only code names. Gray Sky, Project Orion. I heard him talk on the phone sometimes, using those words." Mark made quick notes, the gravity of the situation deepening with every word. He knew he had to inform the state investigators immediately, but he also sensed danger lurking closer than before. "Deputy," Mark said carefully, "have you told anyone else this?" Mills shook his head again, voice lowered to a tense whisper. "No, only you. I don't know who to trust anymore." "But I owed you the truth." Mark appreciated Mills' honesty, but felt an urgent need for caution. "Stay alert, Deputy. Be careful who you talk to from now on." Mills nodded grimly. "Same goes for you." As Mills left the room, Mark gathered the evidence carefully, heart heavy with the burden of new revelations. He knew he had uncovered more than just a local scandal. Thompson's actions had been only the surface. Beneath it lay something darker, something connected to powerful entities beyond their small town. That night, back at home, Mark secured his doors and windows tightly, paranoia creeping into his mind for the first time in his life. He stared at the evidence spread across his dining table, unease settling deeply into his bones. Outside, the darkness seemed to press against the windows, oppressive and ominous. The quiet of Elmridge had returned, yet it no longer felt safe. And as Mark closed the curtains, he realized a chilling truth. The danger had not ended with Thompson's arrest. It was only just beginning. Sleep evaded Mark that night. Every creak of his old house, every gust of wind against the window panes seemed magnified, suspicious. He tossed restlessly, the sheriff's notes replaying vividly through his mind. Gray sky. Project Orion. What had Thompson gotten involved in, and how far-reaching were its implications? Around 2A. Unable to bear the restless anxiety any longer, Mark got up and paced quietly around his living room, eyes darting cautiously toward the darkened street outside. Elmridge was silent, peaceful on the surface, but Mark's mind wouldn't let him rest. He glanced toward the dining table, still scattered with Thompson's documents, illuminated faintly by moonlight filtering through closed curtains. Suddenly, the silence shattered. Mark's phone rang sharply from the table, startling him so badly he nearly dropped it when he snatched it up. The caller ID displayed a blocked number. Heart pounding, Mark answered hesitantly, voice strained. "Hello?" Static crackled faintly on the line before a distorted, electronically altered voice spoke, calm yet menacing. "Mark Hayes, you've been digging in places you shouldn't. I advise you to stop immediately." Mark's grip tightened on the phone, pulse quickening. "Who is this? What do you want?" "Who I am isn't important," the voice replied coldly. "But what I want is simple. Stop asking questions. Forget what you found. Destroy the evidence or face consequences." Mark's jaw clenched tightly, anger overcoming fear. "I'm not going to back down. You can't silence the truth forever." The voice hesitated, then spoke again with chilling certainty. "Then you've made your choice. Remember, we warned you." The call ended abruptly, leaving Mark gripping the phone tightly, breathing heavily. He stared around the shadowed room, fear and adrenaline mingling fiercely. It was no longer just suspicion. Someone was actively watching him, threatening him. The danger was immediate, real. He quickly checked the doors and windows again, locking and bolting each securely. But even as he did, he couldn't shake the paranoia now gripping him. Every sound outside felt like footsteps approaching. He turned on a small lamp, illuminating the living room dimly, trying to chase away the darkness and anxiety. He grabbed the documents from the table, placing them carefully into a sturdy backpack. Whatever happened, he knew he needed to get these to someone he could trust. But who? The state investigators? Deputy Mills? Could he truly trust any of them now? As Mark paced nervously, considering his next move, headlights suddenly flashed brightly through the windows, illuminating the entire room. Mark stiffened, pulse spiking with dread. He quickly turned off the lamp and dropped to a crouch behind his sofa, heart pounding fiercely. The vehicle outside stopped, its engine idling ominously. Mark cautiously peeked out between the curtains, an unfamiliar dark sedan, windows tinted. Two shadowy figures stepped out calmly, scanning his house methodically. Fear surged painfully through Mark. He backed away silently, gripping his backpack tightly. Footsteps approached the porch, creaking slightly. A quiet knock sounded at his front door, polite, controlled, but sinisterly out of place at this hour. Mark hesitated, frozen by indecision. Then came the unmistakable sound of the doorknob turning slowly. Mark's heart slammed against his ribs. He had seconds to react. Without thinking, he sprinted quietly through the back of the house, slipping out into the shadows of his backyard, clutching the evidence close. Behind him, he heard the front door forced open, footsteps rapidly moving through his home. His breath came short and fast as he ran into the darkness, cutting swiftly between neighboring yards. The streetlights blurred past as adrenaline propelled him, the night air burning his lungs. He reached the main road, looking desperately around. Where could he go now? Who would be safe? His mind flashed to Ethan's family. No, he couldn't risk endangering the boy again. Deputy Mills? Possibly. But what if they were watching him too? Suddenly, headlights appeared behind him again, racing forward. Mark dove into the shadows behind parked cars, as the sedan sped by, occupants scanning urgently for him. He pressed himself low, heart racing, barely daring to breathe. When the vehicle disappeared down the street, he rose carefully, knowing his only chance now was to leave town immediately. Mark moved quickly toward the edge of Elmridge, slipping quietly through backyards and alleys, alert for any sign of pursuit. He reached his old truck, parked discreetly behind a friend's workshop. With trembling fingers, he started the engine, relieved when it roared to life. He drove quietly, lights off until he reached the main road out of town, then accelerated rapidly, leaving Elmridge behind. His thoughts raced chaotically. He was alone now. No backup, no clear destination, only the evidence in his backpack and a grim determination to uncover the truth. The mysterious caller's threat echoed chillingly in his ears. He knew he'd crossed a line of no return. From this moment on, Mark Hayes wasn't just searching for answers. He was running for his life. Mark drove through the night, his old truck slicing quietly through deserted back roads, illuminated only by moonlight. His pulse refused to slow, and every shadow on the roadside seemed threatening. Every set of headlights behind him a potential pursuer. He gripped the wheel tightly, eyes flicking constantly toward his rearview mirror. He needed help, but from whom? He thought briefly of the state police, but the mysterious caller's warning echoed bitterly in his mind. Who knew how far their influence reached? Mark realized there was only one person he felt he might trust completely: Daniel Ellis, a friend from college who now worked as an investigative journalist. Daniel lived in a city nearly 2 hours away, far removed from Elmridge and the sheriff's network. Mark reached Daniel's apartment building just as dawn broke, exhaustion tugging at his limbs, paranoia gnawing persistently at his mind. He hesitated at the door before finally knocking firmly. After several tense seconds, Daniel opened it, bleary-eyed but alert as soon as he saw Mark's face. "Mark, what happened?" Daniel quickly ushered him inside, glancing worriedly down the hallway before locking the door securely. Inside, Mark dropped heavily into a chair, handing Daniel the backpack filled with evidence. "It's all in there," he explained, his voice cracking from fatigue and anxiety. Dogs disappearing from Elmridge, experiments, Thompson's involvement, and now threats. I had nowhere else to go. Daniel flipped carefully through the documents, his expression shifting from confusion to shock, then to grim seriousness. "This is huge. Military contractors, shadow operations. Do you realize what you've stumbled into?" Mark nodded heavily, eyes shadowed with exhaustion. "And now they're after me. They broke into my house. I barely got away." Daniel quickly stood, pacing anxiously. "All right, first things first, we get you somewhere safe. Then I'll get this evidence out there. Publicity might be the only shield you have left." But as Daniel spoke, Mark's phone vibrated again, a new text from a blocked number. His heart skipped painfully as he opened it, reading silently, "We warned you. You can run, but can you protect everyone you care about? Elmridge isn't safe. Neither is your friend." Mark's throat tightened with dread. He looked up sharply, meeting Daniel's concerned eyes. "They know I'm here." Daniel's eyes widened, adrenaline visibly surging. "We can't stay here. Grab your things." Within minutes, they were on the road again, speeding toward an old family cabin Daniel's relatives owned, deep in isolated countryside. Daniel drove carefully, frequently checking the mirrors. Mark slumped in the passenger seat, tension twisting through him relentlessly. They arrived mid-morning, sunlight filtering gently through dense woods surrounding the secluded cabin. Inside, Daniel swiftly activated his secure laptop, uploading scans of Thompson's documents to an encrypted cloud server, determined to safeguard the evidence permanently. "We'll stay here until I can get this information out," Daniel explained firmly. "This story, it could unravel everything they're trying to hide." But peace was fleeting. Barely had Daniel finished uploading the files when an alert flashed urgently on his laptop. Someone was remotely accessing his account, attempting to delete the documents. "No, no, no," Daniel shouted, fingers flying across the keyboard desperately. Mark watched in horror as Daniel's face paled. "They've traced my account. They're tracking us now." Heart pounding, Mark peered anxiously outside. Already, distant vehicles moved slowly along the road leading toward the cabin, black SUVs identical to the one Thompson used. "We have to get out," Mark said urgently, grabbing the backpack. Daniel nodded sharply, quickly stuffing the laptop into another bag. They exited swiftly through the rear of the cabin, sprinting across uneven ground into dense forest cover. Behind them, they heard vehicles screeching to a halt, doors slamming shut, voices barking commands. Fear surged painfully through Mark as he ran, Daniel close behind, both navigating trees and underbrush desperately. A shot suddenly echoed sharply through the trees, bark splintering near Mark's head. They ducked lower, adrenaline fueling their escape. Daniel stumbled slightly, panting, shouting desperately to Mark, "Split up! They want you!" "I'll distract them." Mark turned sharply, panic surging. "No, Daniel, wait." But Daniel was already running opposite, drawing shouts and footsteps away from Mark. Torn, Mark hesitated, then forced himself forward, heart aching with guilt and fear. He had no choice but to keep moving, deeper into unfamiliar woods, alone and hunted. He ran until exhaustion overtook him, collapsing finally behind a fallen tree, breathing raggedly. Silence enveloped him, broken only by distant voices shouting, footsteps crunching through leaves. Mark sat trembling, every muscle aching, hopelessness beginning to consume him. He stared up through the trees, desperation choking him, wondering if he'd ever escape alive. Was the truth worth all this, risking Daniel's life, his own life? Doubts flooded him, bitter and relentless. But then, from somewhere deep inside, came renewed resolve. Mark couldn't surrender now. The truth had become bigger than himself, bigger than his fear. He'd uncovered a conspiracy that could threaten many others beyond Elmridge. Taking a deep breath, Mark forced himself back onto unsteady feet, determined to find Daniel, reveal the truth, and finally confront the nightmare head-on. Mark pushed forward through the dense, tangled woods, every breath feeling like fire in his lungs. He moved silently, cautiously, eyes straining through the fading daylight, desperate to find Daniel before it was too late. Voices echoed faintly behind him, occasionally punctuated by shouts and distant, menacing crackles of radios. His mind raced frantically. Had Daniel been captured? Hurt, worse. Guilt twisted painfully inside him, each step heavier than the last. He'd brought this danger upon his friend, and now Daniel was paying the price. Yet retreat wasn't an option. Daniel had risked everything to protect him, and Mark owed it to him to keep going, to fight for the truth they'd both uncovered. After nearly an hour of relentless searching, Mark paused, exhausted and disoriented. Twilight shadows deepened around him, trees blending into indistinct shapes. But then, a sudden movement nearby startled him. He turned sharply, heart racing. "Mark!" came a desperate whisper. Relief flooding him as Daniel emerged cautiously from behind thick brush, scratched and dirty but alive. "You're okay," Mark breathed, voice trembling. Daniel nodded, gripping Mark's shoulder firmly, exhaustion clear in his eyes. "For now, but they're still close," Daniel said grimly. "We need a plan, Mark. We're running out of options." Mark steadied himself, pulse still pounding furiously. "We have the evidence. If we can get it out publicly, maybe they'll back off." Daniel shook his head, discouraged. "Not enough time. They'll silence us before it goes public. We need someone we can trust, someone powerful enough to protect us and act immediately." Mark's mind spun rapidly. Who had that kind of influence? Then it struck him, someone he'd nearly forgotten amid the chaos, State Investigator Clara Bennett, the lead officer from the initial Elmridge investigation. She'd seemed genuinely committed to justice. If anyone had authority and resources to protect them and expose this, it was her. He quickly explained the idea to Daniel, determination returning to his voice. Daniel agreed immediately, pulling out a secure burner phone he'd kept hidden. "Call her, do it now." Mark dialed the number Clara had given him weeks earlier, praying she'd answer quickly. It rang twice before her calm voice answered cautiously. "Bennett here?" "Clara, it's Mark Hayes," he said urgently, voice cracking. "I'm in danger. Daniel Ellis is with me. Thompson's experiments, the missing dogs. It's bigger than we thought. People are after us right now." Clara reacted instantly, her tone sharply focused. "Where are you exactly?" "North of Elmridge, near Daniel's family cabin. deep in the woods. They've tracked us. We don't have long. Hold tight, Mark. Stay hidden. I'm coming immediately, Clara assured firmly. Keep the line open as long as you can. Relief surged faintly through Mark, even as danger lingered closely around them. They crouched low in thick underbrush, listening carefully, hearts pounding, bodies rigid with tension. Each rustle of leaves, each faint noise amplified the dread gripping them. Minutes stretched painfully into eternity, until distant helicopter blades sliced faintly through the air, growing louder rapidly. Mark and Daniel exchanged hopeful glances. Help was finally arriving, but their relief vanished almost immediately as shouts erupted close by. "They're over here, hurry!" Voices yelled urgently, footsteps crashing aggressively toward their position. Mark's blood turned ice cold. "They found us!" Panic surged, but he forced it back, grabbing Daniel's arm tightly. "Run toward the helicopter sound. Clara's almost here." They sprinted recklessly through dense foliage, branches slapping sharply against their faces and bodies, every step painful, adrenaline driving them relentlessly forward. Behind, their pursuers shouted louder, closer, the sound of gunfire exploding terrifyingly close, bullets tearing through nearby trees. Mark's lungs burned, muscles screaming from exhaustion, but he pushed forward desperately, Daniel close at his side. Ahead, flashing lights appeared through the trees, spotlights sweeping urgently across the terrain, Clara and state troopers searching frantically from the helicopter. Suddenly, Daniel cried out sharply, stumbling to the ground. Mark skidded to a halt, heart seizing painfully as he turned back to see Daniel clutching his leg, blood seeping rapidly through his jeans. "They got me!" Daniel gasped, voice tight with pain. "Go, Mark! You have to go!" Mark hesitated, anguish twisting sharply inside him. "I won't leave you!" "You have to!" Daniel shouted fiercely. "I'll slow you down. Get to Clara. Show them everything. Stop these people before anyone else gets hurt." Despair gripped Mark as he knelt briefly beside Daniel, tears welling in his eyes. But Daniel shoved him roughly away, desperation and urgency radiating powerfully. "Please, Mark, don't let this be for nothing." Mark rose reluctantly, trembling fiercely, glancing back painfully once more. "I'll get help, I promise." Then he ran, heart breaking, as Daniel's distant shouts grew faint. Ahead, the helicopter hovered lower, spotlights finding Mark, illuminating his desperate sprint. Bullets cracked sharply around him, each step closer to safety, feeling agonizingly slow. Just as exhaustion nearly overtook him, strong hands pulled him swiftly aboard the helicopter. Clara Bennett's fierce gaze met his, determination blazing in her eyes. "You're safe now, Mark. We'll handle this." Mark slumped against the wall, body shaking, mind numb. Daniel had sacrificed everything for him, for the truth. Now Mark had no choice. He would finish what they started, whatever it took. Inside the helicopter, Mark struggled to steady his breathing, his heartbeat still racing uncontrollably. Clara Bennett studied him carefully, concern etched across her face. "Are you injured?" Mark shook his head, breathless and overwhelmed. "Daniel, he's back there. They shot him." "We have to go back," Clara motioned sharply to the pilot. "Circle around quickly, searchlights on the woods below." The helicopter swung around swiftly, powerful lights cutting brightly through the darkened forest. Below, Mark scanned desperately, fear knotting painfully in his chest. After several tense seconds, he spotted Daniel lying motionless in a small clearing, two dark figures standing over him. "There!" Mark shouted urgently. "They've got him!" Clara barked rapid commands into her radio, dispatching backup to Daniel's location. Seconds later, state police vehicles tore through the distant forest paths, headlights slicing sharply through trees, sirens echoing clearly in the night. Mark watched anxiously as the shadowy figures retreated swiftly into darkness, disappearing entirely just before officers reached Daniel's motionless form. "Land the helicopter, now!" Clara ordered firmly. They descended rapidly into the clearing. Mark leapt out even before they fully touched down, rushing immediately toward Daniel. Kneeling, he gently turned his friend over, relief flooding him when Daniel groaned weakly, eyes fluttering open. "You made it," Daniel whispered faintly, voice strained with pain. Thank God. Paramedics quickly surrounded them, stabilizing Daniel while Clara directed a swift, coordinated search of the area. Moments later, officers emerged from the darkness, escorting two suspects in handcuffs. Men Mark immediately recognized from the chase. Cold, silent figures whose hardened faces betrayed nothing. Clara approached Mark firmly, urgency still radiating from her. "We need answers now, Mark. These men won't talk. Do you have anything that might pressure them into cooperating?" Mark nodded sharply, pulling the backpack from his shoulders, removing Thompson's documents and handing them firmly to Clara. "Everything's in here. The experiments, funding sources, contacts. Whoever these people are working for, they'll be exposed. Make sure they know it." Clara scanned the documents rapidly, eyes widening at the names and details. Without hesitation, she walked purposefully toward the detained men, presenting the evidence clearly. Mark watched carefully from a short distance, exhaustion and tension gripping him fiercely. "You've failed," Clara said, her voice cold and authoritative. "Your operation is exposed. These files link you to powerful people who won't risk being dragged down by your silence. Talk now, cooperate, or face the full consequences alone." The suspects exchanged uncertain glances, their confidence visibly cracking under pressure. Finally, one nodded subtly, speaking in a low voice filled with resignation. "We were hired. Private contractors working under a government subcontractor. The sheriff was just a pawn. When he failed, they ordered a cleanup." Clara pressed sharply. "Who exactly hired you?" The man hesitated, then muttered quietly, "Project Orion, a Black Ops initiative, Department of Defense oversight, but officially, it doesn't exist. They'll erase us too if we say more." Clara glanced sharply toward Mark, her expression grave yet determined. "This goes deeper than expected, but we finally have something concrete. We can follow this trail." The suspects were quickly loaded into vehicles, bound securely, and driven swiftly away. Daniel was lifted gently into the ambulance, paramedics assuring Mark he would survive. Mark exhaled deeply, tension finally easing slightly from his exhausted body. Yet something inside Mark still felt unresolved. He turned quietly to Clara, voicing his lingering doubts. "What about the others behind this? Will they really let this go?" Clara met his gaze, expression solemn. "We've uncovered enough to trigger a federal investigation. Public exposure is our best protection now. They thrive on secrecy. Take that away, and their power crumbles." As dawn broke gently over the clearing, sunlight filtered softly through trees, bathing the scene in quiet reassurance. Mark felt clarity returning slowly, replaced by growing resolve. The truth was finally emerging. Justice felt within reach. He climbed slowly back into the helicopter beside Clara, mind calmer despite lingering anxiety. Below, officers methodically combed the area, meticulously documenting evidence and securing the scene. Clara placed a reassuring hand firmly on Mark's shoulder, her voice filled with quiet respect. "You did well, Mark. Without you and Daniel, none of this would have come to light. You risked everything for the truth." Mark nodded silently, reflecting deeply. The past year had taken everything: trust, peace, security. But it had also shown him resilience, courage, and the power of ordinary people facing extraordinary darkness. As the helicopter lifted off once again, soaring gracefully above treetops into brightening skies, Mark stared downward, watching Elmridge recede slowly below. The small town had weathered unimaginable storms, but beneath him, sunlight illuminated streets, homes and faces beginning to heal at last. Yet he knew deep down, this fight wasn't entirely over. The forces behind Project Orion were powerful, secretive, ruthless. They'd retreat now, wounded but not destroyed. Someday soon, they'd try again. But when they did, Mark would be ready. This was his home, his people, his fight. He'd confronted darkness, survived fear, and reclaimed truth. No matter the danger, he'd face it again, braver, stronger, unafraid. In the months that followed, life in Elmridge slowly regained a sense of peace and normalcy. The scars from Sheriff Thompson's betrayal and the frightening events surrounding Project Orion were still fresh, but the community had started to heal. Dogs played freely in yards again, children laughed openly in parks, and neighbors trusted each other once more. Yet no one forgot the cost of that peace or the bravery it required. Daniel made a full recovery, returning home with a newfound purpose. His investigative journalism took on greater urgency and determination, exposing corruption, injustice, and abuse of power wherever he could find it. Though Mark and Daniel never spoke openly about their trauma, an unspoken bond grew between them, an understanding forged from shared danger, fear, and courage. Deputy Mills resigned from law enforcement, dedicating his time to working at an animal shelter, finding redemption in caring for those unable to speak for themselves. He often visited Mark, quietly expressing gratitude and lingering remorse. Mark offered no judgment, only forgiveness. Everyone, he knew, deserved a chance to start again. Clara Bennett's investigation had triggered sweeping changes. Project Orion had been dismantled, and although its shadowy backers avoided public accountability, the exposure forced them deep into hiding. Clara often updated Mark, ensuring him their efforts had made a real, tangible difference. Their victory wasn't absolute, but it was meaningful. A crucial step toward transparency, accountability, and justice. For Mark, life settled into quieter rhythms. He returned to his mail route, appreciating the simple joy of familiar faces, friendly greetings, and small-town tranquility. But beneath that tranquility, Mark felt changed forever. His brush with darkness had left him cautious, alert yet profoundly grateful for ordinary moments of peace and safety. One bright spring afternoon, as Mark finished his delivery route, he stopped at the edge of town near the same forest where his journey had begun. Standing at the tree line was Ethan, smiling brightly, Jasper bounding energetically beside him. Mark approached warmly, greeting them both with genuine affection. "Jasper looks great," Mark said gently, kneeling to scratch behind the dog's ears. Jasper wagged his tail enthusiastically, eyes shining with joyful energy. Ethan smiled proudly. "He's better now, stronger. I think he knows he's safe again." Mark nodded quietly, emotions stirring within him. "He's lucky to have you, Ethan, and I'm lucky you were brave enough to speak up. None of this would have happened without you." Ethan blushed slightly, shrugging shyly. "I just missed Jasper. I knew something wasn't right." Mark placed a comforting hand on the boy's shoulder. "That instinct you have, never lose it. Trust it. It makes you stronger than you know." Ethan nodded seriously, absorbing the words deeply. Mark stood up, breathing in the fresh spring air, feeling warmth spread gently through his chest. He knew Ethan represented hope, the next generation, wiser and braver for having faced darkness so early. That evening, Mark sat quietly on his porch, watching stars blink softly overhead, feeling peaceful for the first time in months. His phone vibrated softly, Daniel texting, "We did good, Mark, truth matters. Never forget that." Mark smiled softly, heart full. He typed back quickly, "Couldn't have done it without you. Let's never stop fighting." Setting down the phone, he leaned back, eyes reflecting quietly into the night sky. A quiet voice spoke inside him, a truth born from pain yet stronger because of it. Darkness exists, yes, but so does light. Evil has power, but courage is stronger. Secrets thrive in shadows, yet truth shines brightest of all. He thought of Elmridge, its resilience and courage proven, its wounds slowly fading into scars that told a story of ordinary people standing bravely against extraordinary evil. It was a story Mark knew would echo far beyond their small town. Mark rose slowly, stepping down off his porch, feeling the cool grass beneath his feet. He walked quietly toward the mailbox at the end of his driveway, smiling faintly at the gentle symbolism. His entire life had been dedicated to delivering messages, notes, letters, everyday pieces of life connecting people quietly, invisibly. But now he realized he delivered something greater: hope, justice, and a reminder that no one needs to face darkness alone. As Mark opened the mailbox, pulling out a handful of letters beneath the soft glow of streetlights, he noticed one letter addressed personally to him, marked clearly and simply, "Thank you." Opening it carefully, he read quietly, "Mark, you don't know me, but your bravery changed everything for my family. Our dog was one of those you saved. Every night, seeing her safe beside our children reminds me good people still exist. You reminded us all of that. Thank you for showing us what real courage looks like. Sincerely, a grateful neighbor." Mark folded the letter gently, eyes shining with quiet emotion. He stood silently beneath the stars, feeling a profound peace settle warmly within him. In that moment, he understood clearly. He hadn't just survived. He'd chosen courage over fear, truth over silence. He'd shown others they could do the same. And in doing so, Mark had discovered the greatest strength of all, the power of ordinary goodness confronting extraordinary evil. If this powerful story moved you, join us by subscribing now. Let's never stop fighting for truth and justice together. And if you're ready to experience another unforgettable story, watch the video recommended on your screen.